All right. Well, I want to thank everyone for coming today to the HSMAI Foundation's faculty webinar on cracking the code, navigating hospitality's distribution maze. So this is our first of our quarterly webinar series for faculty. And so before we begin, I just want to say a few words about the HSMAI Foundation. And my name is Kristen Miedansky, and I'm the Executive Director of the HSMAI Foundation. And our mission is really to cultivate people. We invest in a skilled and diverse commercial workforce for global hospitality to strengthen performance and ensure a thriving, competitive, future-ready industry. And we really do this through attracting new talent, through retaining current talent, and through developing current talent. And so specifically for hospitality faculty, we want to be able to equip you with current industry insights through these quarterly sessions. And then you'll be able to use the insights in curriculum and for student projects. So I just wanted to go over a few of the resources that we have for faculty and students. We have a whole library of curriculum support videos on our website. We have events such as these quarterly webinars, and then also faculty and student rates to our commercial strategy conference in June in San Antonio. We just relaunched our faculty newsletter in December of last year. And so we'll be sending that out quarterly as well, sort of before the webinar series. So we'll have we'll send out to all registrants a link to sign up for that faculty newsletter. In May, we'll open our Mike Diamond Scholarship process, where we award students funds and mentoring with an industry expert. And then we also have the CRMA certification, which is a great resource for faculty and students. It was written by industry specifically for students, and it comes with a study guide to support your curriculum. Finally, we have a library of industry research, including recently the State of Talent, as well as the Ancillary Revenue Guide. And so I just wanted to launch a poll here to ask a few questions to attendees. If you could answer first what question you teach, what you teach: sales, revenue, marketing, distribution, commercial, or sort of more generally hospitality management, or other. We'll just give you a few seconds to fill that out. Great, and just about 5 more seconds to answer. So if you haven't put something down, now's the time. Awesome. And the next question. Okay. Is what additional resources would you like to see from HSMAI and the HSMAI Foundation? So it should be a short answer there. And then the third question is, what topics would you like to see for future webinars? Feel free to put your answers there in the poll. Perfect. We'll just have about 10 more seconds here so you can answer in. And if you ever have ideas for more resources or future webinars, you're always able to reach out to me, and then I'll send my email in the follow-up as well. So thank you for filling out the poll. And now I'm going to turn it over to Breffney Noon, who is a member of the HSMA Foundation Board, as well as the Revenue Advisory Board.
Thanks so much, Kristen. Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. As Kristen said, my name is Breffney Noon. I'm an associate professor at Penn State University. My co-host today on this webinar is Anya Fiedler. She also serves with me on the HSMAI Revenue Optimization Advisory Board. Anya works at the core, where she's Vice President of Revenue Management Systems and Solutions for Raffles and Fairmont. So thank you, Anya. Folks, this session is really designed to help us as faculty to keep up with the fast changing distribution landscape and hopefully gain some insights that you'll be able to share in the classroom with your students. And to that end, it's my pleasure to introduce our two industry speakers for today. First up is Sarah Fultz. Sarah is the Vice President of Distribution at MGM Resorts International. Sarah brings over 30 years of experience in the industry to the table. Sarah started at the front desk, where her passion for technology began, and she then went on to hold various roles in this space, including key roles in distribution and tech solutions for Choice Hotels and Lowe's Hotels and Resorts. So welcome, Sarah. And we also have joining us Rhett Hirko. Rhett serves as the Senior Vice President of Revenue Optimization and Distribution for Preferred Travel Group. He also brings more than 30 years of experience to the table today. Before joining Preferred, Rhett worked with Hyatt Hotels, where he designed and implemented the central reservations process for the company and oversaw revenue management in both the regional capacity here in North America and internationally, ending his tenure in Zurich, Switzerland. And Rhett also serves on the HSMAI Americas board. So welcome to you, Rhett. In terms of the format of our webinar today, we've planned for about 35 minutes, 40 minutes of discussion, followed by some time for Q&A. So please feel free to drop any questions you have into the Q&A as we go along, and we'll tackle them at the end. So without further ado, Anya, I'll pass it over to you to get the ball rolling.
Yes, welcome everyone. We are going to start out with a little icebreaker and a fun question of what is the biggest misconception that you, Sarah, or Red are hearing today about how distribution actually works in hotels?
Thanks, Anya. I'll go first. And hello, everyone. I'm happy to be here. Thank you to HSMAI for having me. I would say the biggest misconception, it's weird I can't see you guys, but I see you're out there. The biggest misconception is that in a very connected world, we're still terribly disconnected in the distribution space. So I know that we're known in the hospitality industry to not be on the forefront of tech, and we've made a lot of strides over the years, but we are still very disconnected, which causes us to have a lot of labor to get all of the systems talking and working together. So from building promotions to managing content or connectivity systems or even overriding rates in the revenue management system, there's still a lot of manual processes that exist. And I think the biggest one for me that I say if I really want to hone in on something is when we work with third parties like the OTAs, we still actually use Excel documents. We call them trackers, where we have to submit our rates and our promotions that we build in a tracker in an Excel sheet and send it to the OTA. That actually still exists today for most of the OTAs.
Yeah, it's crazy, Sarah. I can ditto on that. It's really surprising that we still live in such a manual environment. Thanks, everyone. I'm Rhett Hirko, and it's really a pleasure to be here and to chat with my colleagues about what's going on to help you and the faculty better understand really a lot of the changes that are happening in distribution. With regards to this, we talked about this when we first got together for the panel, is this misconception that distribution is revenue management, and it's not. There's completely different disciplines. While they need each other, they're very different. And often the real challenge comes in a place where you have revenue managers that think they understand distribution, and they are put in charge of making some pretty critical decisions without understanding really the impact of those decisions, lacking the education to understand really the costs of some of those decisions and how they can impact the overall hotel's performance and optimization. So I would say that that is a critical area. In fact, just this morning, I was on a call with my team that is out in France, and they had a consultant assist a hotel, and her background was revenue management, and the distribution impact of a mistake that was made are in hundreds of thousands of euro to a single hotel. So the impact of understanding that revenue management is not distribution is really critical.
Okay, thank you both. So this kind of sets the stage for our next question, which is really, from your perspective, what has changed the most in distribution in the last, say, 5 to 10 years? And, what does that change in terms of how hotels operate today? So maybe, Rhett, I'll give this to you first.
Sure, happy to take that on. Well, it's actually happening right now. COVID was interesting because there was a little opportunity for a little bit of acceleration of what's happening today. So during COVID, the OTAs were really struggling, unlike hotels that had an asset and can try and get individuals in, even walking in. The OTAs didn't have that, and so they started to modify their commercial strategy, and that has now accelerated to really driving more B2B business. And so it's really started during the COVID era where there was desperation for everybody, and it has grown into a full-fledged strategy. In fact, if you look at the quarterly earnings calls from the publicly traded OTAs, they'll all mention about how the B2B business has just exploded. So it is the single most disruptive change to the industry since the internet is this growth of B2B business. Independent hotels, so now I'm getting into that space, a lot of them lack the understanding to educate themselves that this is happening, and they're desperate for OTAs because they're independent. They need that marketing. And so to put heads in beds, this combination as to the explosive growth of B2B business, the leakage that comes out of that, and we can talk about that more in a bit. It's always been there, but because the strategy has changed, is really creating this disruptive change to the way that we handle working with our OTAs. And on top of that, that requires control. And what is coming in 2026 is the world of AI and the world of chatbots. So this idea that there's less control in the independent space, and Sarah can talk more on the branded space, but certainly on the independent space, that there's less control of the distribution because of this B2B, and then AI that's going to allow computers to be doing the search on behalf of the customer has ended up being really it's going to change the industry in 2026 and 2027 fundamentally.
Okay.
So it's happening
Okay.
now.
It's happening now. Sarah, what would you like to add to that?
Yeah, thanks. I will expand on what Rhett said. Definitely agree on the commercial side. That's the side that has changed the most, even from just your typical contracts with the third parties, different language over 5 to 10 years, focusing, originally 10 years ago, we focused on keywords and making sure people weren't buying our keywords. To today, we're really focused on how do we solve this B2B that Rhett's going to touch on further later. I want to emphasize what hasn't really evolved. So while I've been in this industry for 30 years, I've focused on distribution/connectivity for 20 years. And there's actually a connectivity system that I still use today, I won't say the name, that literally looks exactly the same as when I used it in 2005. Same UI, the concepts are the same. Yes, they've added some more features and functions, but the world of connectivity actually hasn't evolved as much as we hope it would evolve. Obviously, the larger OTAs help drive some technology, but you still have your PMSs and your CRSs that can lack in different functionality. So that's one area that I think where we haven't evolved. But just touching on Breffany's point about how it impacts how hotels operate today, what I have seen and I continue to see in our industry is, and Rhett touched on it earlier, understanding distribution, understanding revenue management. And I think when we focus on distribution, there's lots of different areas that make up distribution. You have the account management, sales, contractual team, you have content team, you have the connectivity team, you have the GDS team, you have a product team that manages your PMS or your CRS. And when I look across a lot of brands, I see that those teams are all disparate across the organization. You might have the PMS and CRS being owned by the tech team, and the content team sits in the digital world, and the content team that sits in the digital world is very different than the content team that needs to focus on how it works for third parties. And so having the team spread out, and I feel like every couple of years they'll do reorgs in mostly in the larger, bigger brands, and they shift these teams around and they're not working together. I'm very fortunate at MGM that all of that sits under me, so then I'm able to control it, which I think is the same for Rhett. And that's actually something that's really important, right? Because when you have those teams spread out, you can't really, it's hard, you're siloed, you're not talking together, everybody's focused on something different. So I think that's the impact on the hotel operators today.
Yeah, this convergence, right? Of there, it's really interesting that there's so much in connectivity that hasn't changed. Like you were just talking about
Mhm.
this Excel, which is like probably
Yeah.
shocking to a lot of people. And you work with these old tools, and yet there is this convergence now of all of these disciplines that have to be working together for
Yeah.
success. It's absolutely critical today.
I couldn't echo this more, actually. I think to summarize both of your points also a little bit is that while some of these vendors really are, they're sending improvements for their systems, for their existing systems, there's also the addition of new vendors that are addressing smaller pieces of this whole distribution puzzle. And I think this point that you guys just made about teams working together it's becoming more and more crucial that everybody is working together and aware of all the different options that are available to the hotel and making sure that there is no siloing or working in parallel on maybe something that provides the same solution nowadays. Because all the vendors also they look at what's available in the marketplace and try to expand into these different areas. So this is a very important point, I think. Um, Shifting a little bit more over into technology choices, which in the past can have been more of a back of the house operational decision as you guys both just highlighted today, this is technology choices is something that drives and enables or disables strategic decisions, commercial strategy for the hotel. So maybe starting with Sarah, MGM just shifted to a new central reservation system. From a more general perspective, what were some of the considerations that went into deciding and selecting on a vendor? And can you maybe name a few system capabilities in general that you feel should be on the radar when selecting a vendor?
Absolutely. This project was, and I know Rhett and I talked about it because he's done a CRS conversion as well. This was my favorite yet most grueling project I've ever done in my career. It took 6 years to get this project from RFP out the door. A project that I'm very proud of and glad that I have behind me. And so when MGM was out there looking at the CRS providers, things that were important to us were obviously integration into our PMS and our RMS. We actually didn't have an RMS at the time. So we rolled out the RMS and the CRS at the same time. So we picked those together. We wanted to ensure that we had a reduction in labor. When I walked into MGM, I had 24 people manually inputting rates all day long into various systems. So we needed to reduce that labor and have everything automated. And we wanted to be able to quickly get promotions built into the market, especially in a Las Vegas. We build a lot of promotions. We have to get them out quickly. We wanted to reduce our overall cost of distribution. So we had a lot of different ways that we were doing connectivity, but doing direct connections from the actual CRS out to the OTA instead of going through a channel manager. That is money that we're reducing every day by simplifying that connectivity. We wanted a fast engine. We need to be able to scale if we want to add hotels, and we have a lot of products. Products are room types and rate codes. So MGM properties can have 50 different room types. We need that product to be able to easily scale and keep up with the amount of data that we're sending through it. And then for a company the size of MGM, we needed custom APIs so that they could we could code to a custom call center and booking engine module. So a size like MGM, those are custom, those aren't out of the box tools that we're using in a CRS. And then, of course, with MGM, we have our gaming. So we needed a provider that could help develop our secret sauce for our gaming customers and what offers that we provide them.
All right. So that is the view from a brand where it's arguably a little bit simpler to implement, similar solutions for a number of hotels. When we shift over to Red, in your environment, you're dealing more with independent hotels. Can you speak a little bit to the challenges that particular environment brings to selecting vendors and deploying vendors?
Yeah, so I will speak to it on two facets. And first of all, talking about it at the hotel level, so hotel specific, the four walls, right? So they're independent property. There's again a lack of education as to understanding really what each of those technologies can provide and why that's important. And sometimes the decision making might fall on a couple of cents here and there, and not really thinking about the bigger impact of what that technology can do, or how that technology needs to be complemented by another piece of technology to be able to make that work. That is clearly something that remains a challenge. The hotels, in the end, we call ourselves a soft brand, so we offer solutions at a higher level to complement what the hotel needs. So when we do that, one of the things that we have to do is be able to connect into that technology. And so, for instance, we connect into 67 different PMS systems across the world to try and be able to distribute reservations or provide content to our guests. That technology has to work also with us. And so, again, it's a real challenge to try and work with hotels that may already have long-term contracts with providers, and that technology doesn't necessarily integrate with what we have. And so in the end, it is really an understanding as to, first of all, getting the hotel to understand, do they want to make changes to be able to take the benefits of what we offer as a brand to further complement their revenue distribution strategy, or do we need to find some kind of alternative and some creative solutions? In the end, the hotel needs to understand what they need to optimize whatever that is within their four walls. As an independent property, we can certainly be tapped to be able to provide some of that guidance, but I would say it probably doesn't happen as nearly as much as it should. If you were to take a look at my background, the amount of insight that just myself I can provide an independent property, it'd be great if there's a lot more of the tapping on the shoulder to ask me those types of questions, because as Sarah can attest to, when you're choosing this technology, it should not just be a quick decision. Really, really impactful decisions that need to be made on the property. A lot of times, a lot of the times, the independent properties just don't have the good enough understanding.
Yeah. So I'm going to pivot a little bit away from the tech itself to talk a little bit about demand control and visibility, right? So I think something that's come up so far, which is really relevant to this, is this idea of trying to control whether it's B2B or whatever it is in the marketplace. And the idea, Sarah, that you brought up, that there are so many streams within distribution, and how do you get people to work together for the good of the whole as opposed to working in silos? And I know when I think about, say, for example, demand control, like you're thinking really about who finds you. And then visibility is, how do you use the platforms to show you and work with those platforms to show you? So obviously you've got to think about all those contents or those elements or inputs there that you talked about earlier, everything from content, price visibility, and so on. So Red, I want to start with you and, putting on the hat or the perspective of the independent hotel operator. you talked about this idea of not only do we have the OTAs, but now we've got this AI-driven recommendation engines and so on. So what does meaningful control over demand and visibility look like for independent hotels, especially when they don't have the scale of somewhere like MGM?
Yeah. So here's where I love the space that I'm in because we are in the independent luxury space. So we're naturally about authentic experiences. That's what our hotels were built for. And so what I really love is that because they naturally define the space, they need to embrace that. So as we underneath Preferred Travel Group, we have a bunch of brands. I'm going to give an example. One brand is Preferred Hotels and Resorts that are best. It's our best known brand. But we also have Historic Hotels of America, and we actually operate that on license from the Department of the Interior. And so one of the things is you could have a hotel, we call it that's dual branded. But that branding could be very different based on that audience. And so if you think about a hotel that's independent, that's in that space, it could, from the luxury side, be talking about, so they're part of preferred hotels and historic hotels. On the preferred hotels side, we generate content that is about that luxury experience, that's authentic, that luxury customer would want to be looking for. But then on the historic side of it, we talk about the historic nature of the property. So did Abraham Lincoln stay in the room or that kind of, it's a very different approach of providing content. So when we think about where things are going in the world of so we distribute to OTAs with these different thoughts in mind, with these niches in mind. But then in addition, when we're starting to think about where there's going to be AI generated content, is then how do we take that content that's unique and be able to leverage that uniqueness of the hotel to appeal to both of those audiences? So retooling that content. And then on top of that, of course, focusing on local offers, loyalty distribution to drive home the sale as we have after we've been able to um, grab the customer through that discovery phase. So I'm really excited about what AI is going to be able to do. We do this today, but it's in the process that everyone's used to today through SEO and that kind of content. And tomorrow, because it's going to be computers that are going to be pulling the content on behalf of the customer, it's really making sure that we're indexing this type of content in a way for it to be easily found by that AI bot to compete in this space effectively and grab and be successful in the discovery phase to then move it into the booking phase where we're using the promotions and the things in distribution to drive home the sale.
And if I can just go back real fast to the misconception that you spoke about at the start, revenue management isn't distribution and vice versa. What happens with the types of independent properties that are under the preferred group umbrella in terms of who's doing what and where do you see the stressors in the relationships in terms of managing distribution?
In terms of what you mean, the individuals or the channels? What do you mean?
The individuals managing distribution and who's working with the individual channels. So kind of how it all fits together, as it were.
Yeah, so the old adage, you can bring a horse to water, but you can't make it drink, really works well in this space. So
Okay.
our goal, and Sarah, it's probably the same in branded hotels as well. It's just really exacerbated here. Is that our goal is to provide opportunity and to provide education and direction for our properties to be able to take advantage of this, right? But in the end, the hotel, they're all independent properties. It's not for me to tell the independent property what their strategy should be. They're going to have to decide if they want to take advantage of that or not. And so you've got a broad scale. You've got people who are super bright that I have no worries about what they do. There are hotels that I talk to that I know if I talk to this revenue manager or this director of sales, that they're going to know what to do to make the execution happen. And they've got good relationships with distribution partners to make it effective and commercially effective. And then you've got hotels on the other end of the spectrum where it's a disaster on any on any point wherever, and then everything in between, right? So, you know,
Yeah.
when I worked at a branded property, when I worked for Hyatt, it was similar. It's more exacerbated in the independent side because the hotels have to rely more on themselves to be able to do it. But it is in the end up to the hotels to determine how they're going to execute on that strategy. We bring those opportunities to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And then Sarah, coming back to you, so you obviously have the great fortune of being in the position where you oversee all of the elements that drive the distribution portfolio and manages the inputs and the levers. Um, can you, for 1 minute, think about what it was like in positions before where you didn't have that scope of responsibility versus what you have now and the advantages that you see really of having this better alignment instead of siloing of activities?
So we were talking a little bit before this call about, so Anya, Rhett, and I all work for very different types of hotel
Mm-hmm.
companies. And
Sure.
I don't know how much the students really understand it until you get in and you work for a brand and you understand how it really operates. You can understand it on paper from a textbook and conceptually on screen, but until you get into that brand and you really understand, I was saying the first time I worked for a franchisee company, which was Choice, it's very different than when I came from the owned and managed world of Lowe's. And I started my career actually at an independent hotel. So I know what Rhett is talking about. That was back when we didn't even have email. Yeah, we were using memos. And yeah, that's a whole conversation in itself. And now I feel very fortunate that I'm at MGM because not only everything is centralized, we also have everything in Vegas. So I am very lucky. I am a little biased that I like to work for an owned managed company. It's a little bit easier. Franchises have its own challenges, and independence, obviously, as Rhett said as well. But even in a company like MGM, of course, silos are really hard to not. They exist
Yeah.
everywhere, right? And
Mhm.
I think, and we've had changes over the years on leadership and commercial, and now we've settled into a chief revenue officer and a chief marketing officer, and they really drive the strategy and develop the strategy, and then tech is there to support it, right? Tech runs the day to day and keeps the hotels running, but the commercial team really drives what's the strategy, what should we be working on, and that helps. But of course, we still have silos, and sometimes the right hand doesn't know what the left hand's talking to. But a lot of that is developing a strategy, including long range planning and working towards that strategy.
Yeah. Thank you. And just to let you know, silos are not unique to the industry. I think one of the
That's right.
battles we face in academia is, the subjects of revenue, sales, marketing, and distribution very often lie in different streams and different courses. And I think the challenge for us is how do we get students to think about the commercial function and commercial strategy holistically, and to be aware of the need for that alignment. So I think you see it on both sides of the coin.
Yeah. And to add to that, actually, Red described making opportunities available, and then the hotels have to choose
Yeah.
to take up these opportunities. That applies also in brands. I think there's perhaps a little bit more of an opportunity to prescribe something or to make something highly recommended or to make something mandatory. But at the end of the day, to really be successful within commercial strategy, the hotel has to lean into the opportunity and really and run with it. There's a difference in just implementing something or taking it and amplifying it with everything that you have available to you within your property and within your immediate control. So I think, that piece is not isolated. It might be magnified a little bit more on the independent hotel side because you're dealing perhaps with a little bit more the need of trying to figure out how will the things work from a technology perspective. But I think this piece of education is so crucial where people understand that if they lean into an opportunity, what does that bring to the table for their hotel individually and then also for the brand or for the larger organization that they are part of.
Mhm.
Um, so, talking about that, kind of leading a little bit further over into B2B distribution that was mentioned earlier on the call as well. Originally, that kind of used to be more focused on just creating streams of demand that the hotels can then tap into in order to have steady demand coming into the hotel. Today, this is shifting increasingly into an area where we have choices and on which control do we want to keep in the connectivities that we build or in the partnering that we do, and which margins do we want to give, and what risks we accept or not accept. So, giving this question back to Red, as third-party platforms increasingly compete for B2B demand, so be that through maybe corporate booking tools, membership programs, managed travel platforms, how do you decide which B2B relationships are still worth owning and protecting, and which ones or what considerations go into perhaps willing to let intermediaries take a little bit more control of the environment?
Yeah, so great question, Anya. So, first of all, to be clear, the goal is for you to control everything. So now that's not reality, right? We need partners to be able to be effective. The world is competitive. Gone are the days when you were the only hotel in a destination. So your competition is there. So how do I compete in a world where I have to have intermediaries? And this is where you start thinking about the strategic objective. And this is where we're going to probably talk about this a little bit more in a second too. This is where things start to become a little bit more of it needs to be demystified. And that is that you want to be able to leverage your most profitable channels, and then working on a strategy where you have a few key partners with the margin and inventory that you can control. And then that's really the goal here. And so a lot of times we can see where there's the dartboard strategy, where a hotel will say, listen, here's a new partner. Yes, I want to sign up, and you're going to distribute me. And the challenge with that is that in today's world, as we've talked about, it's become more and more B2B driven. And because of that, now when a rate is placed out there, that rate, it can be grabbed by anybody, for sale by anybody at any time. So when I've got 30 different OTAs that I'm competing that I'm working with, we need to be real and understanding that those rates can be sold by anybody, anywhere, anytime. So the only way that I can actually be effective in this is to take back control by reducing the amount of like intermediaries and being very strategic with whom that I choose. And a lot of times we see hotels thinking, "Oh, this seems like this is a good idea. Oh, I don't get business from Kazakhstan, and you have a distribution in Kazakhstan. Let me sign up for that," which all that does is gets them maybe one room from Kazakhstan, but does allow that rate to go out into the distribution world and is picked up and is sold by somebody else. And so that's really where the challenge is. As you said, Anya, this idea that it was access to steady demand because I was able to, yeah, kind of put heads in beds, that's gone. That no longer exists. Instead, it is a world that the rate is out there. Anybody can grab it at any time, and especially in the world of the very large OTAs, which are really just wholesalers, and they will take that low rate and connect with tens of thousands of intermediaries, and it can be impossible to find where that rate ends up. And this is where they can, if you're going to put it out there, they can grab it and they'll sell it, and the hotel will end up undercutting their own rates. So really, how do you decide which relationships that are going to work for you? It's really understanding what are the ones that are going to be partners with me, that I have degrees of control, that are also going to give me incremental growth, not at the cost of my own business.
I wholeheartedly agree with everything you said. And I'm going to add an additional dimension into this because I also often have conversations with hotels about, ooh, there's a great opportunity in Kazakhstan. The other piece to this is actually also the content management you're not only controlling your pricing, that you're not undercutting ideally your own website, but also that the right content lives everywhere and you have control over that content. So when something changes, you're not spending an enormous amount of time trying to chase down where this old picture from this room from 1985 comes from. And
It's crazy, right?
so,
It's a
yeah,
real problem.
that
It's
is a real problem.
and
So,
and a lot of these distributors as well will pull content from third-party sources. We're talking
exactly.
even photos, right? That are coming from the
Mhm.
guest, and those can reside somewhere and be outwardly distributed. And you would not, you have to be able to manage that. There
Yeah.
was a distributor, I can't remember who it was, where that was their strategy. They worked with a company called Oyster, and
I was
Oyster,
just going to say Oysterette.
remember that if they would collect
Yes, the
guest
content.
photos and content and distribute that, and that was their strategy.
Yeah.
Yikes.
And
Yeah.
just to add to that, we have not been able to solve this issue with commercial agreements,
Yep.
right? So now there's tech companies that are specifically trying to solve this B2B problem, but there is no perfect solution out there to solve it yet. We're all struggling to solve this B2B issue.
Right. So these are important considerations. It's no longer just about a commission level or a margin that we're paying to a partner. It's the connectivity to that partner for rates, availability, inventory, as well as content management, so that we can maintain a level of control on all of these fronts and be in control of our own destiny when it comes to publishing, pricing and availability.
Yeah, and I think I might just latch onto that there, Anya. This whole idea, I mean, you talked about incremental growth. We're talking about, distribution decisions and partnerships that ultimately are going to have a significant effect on profitability. So when you think about distribution economics and you're thinking about all the multiple channels you can work with, the shiny object in Kazakhstan and so on and so forth, how do you, right, I'll start with you. So how do you think about, investment from an independent hotel's perspective? And, how do they go about evaluating trade-offs and figuring out, what's the impact of my P&L? Can I even trace an ROI? So I go and, invest in X, Y, and Z. How do I truly know it's incremental growth or incremental revenue that I'm getting?
Yeah, so I think first of all, reducing the amount of partners
Yeah. Okay.
that is just really key because nobody can, I always tell this to nobody can do 30 things well at the same time. It's not possible, right? So you need to start to reduce this down. And by the way, when you look at it, and this is with every hotel has got a couple of key partners and everybody else is just they produce very little. So it's really looking at a key partners and one or two key other strategic ones that will complement that. But then, well, one of the things that we're always faced with is understanding what's happening on that P&L, right? And so what happens is that the we need to think about this long-term strategy and where all of these costs fall on the P&L. And because it can become very misleading to somebody like an asset manager that's looking for a quick return on the investment to say, okay, I just want this is what we should do, when instead a long-term strategic vision that identifies that all of these costs, like this could be a commission, this is a transaction cost, this is a loyalty, this is the margin. These can fall into different places on the P&L, but in the end, they're all costs. And in
Mhm.
the end, the hotel as an business operation has an end goal to make more money. Understanding where everything falls on the P&L and explaining that to that asset manager so that then they can understand that, in fact, the best thing to do is maybe taking this long-term solution where I may be able to invest in these right channels, which initially on a quarterly basis may go contrary to what that asset manager thinks. And instead, think about this long-term investment that will get them to something that has longevity and has greater profitability in 2 years' time, not this quarter, is really important. And I will add that so often again, going back to the independent world, you've got a general manager that maybe comes from an F&B background. And so they are so myopic and focused on cost containment that so often what happens is that they don't understand that the adage, and I always say, is that I've got $25,000. Do I buy an oven, or do I invest in this a revenue management system, or in this strategic decision? And so often it's the oven, and not realizing that actually this strategic decision is going to bring them 2 ovens or 3 ovens in the long run. And so that is really a challenge in the independent space, where we've got such a lack of understanding of this transparency of just a cost is a cost in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. And Sarah, any thoughts from your side?
Really well said, Red. I just want to add, right? All the hoteliers on the phone are going to say direct is best, right? We all put a lot of efforts into our direct channels, but leisure is an important part of our business. I can say, especially in Vegas, we have 36,000 rooms we have to fill a night. So the leisure relationships are important. But what Rhett said about making sure you're paring it down, because when you engage with some of these partners, they give you numbers on what they think they're going to produce in your market. And a lot of times, I think Brett even said that they don't produce what they say they're going to produce. So some of it's just trial and error on testing some of these partners and then paring down and making sure you have the right mix.
Okay. Perfect. Just before we carry on, I'm just going to get to a bit more of a faculty focus for the classroom. If anybody on the call wants to send anything to the Q&A, please do, because we might have a couple of moments to get to that before we sign off. But before we do that, so we've talked a lot about changes, opportunities, challenges in the distribution landscape, and it reshapes how hotels are operating, and in some instances doesn't. But education is constantly evolving too. And I think about curriculum, and I think about preparing students to be, or hospitality students to be, strong leaders in the industry. If you could pick one distribution related concept that we as faculty should make sure that students know leaving school, what would you say that is?
Sarah,
I'm
you go
happy
first.
to go. Yeah, I'm happy to go first. I actually have 2 answers to this. So
Ooh.
because I'm not a revenue manager, right? So
Yeah.
you couldn't pay me to do revenue management. It's not my thing, right? But I have to understand revenue management, as a big part of my job is distribution. So we use Ideas as our revenue management system. We also used Ideas at Lowe's. In fact, when I was at Lowe's and we were implementing Ideas, Ideas does this game where it's a game they did for all the dorms, and I was sitting in there, so I participated. And you have to price the hotel. They give you this simulated scenario, and for me, I wasn't great at it. This is how I knew I wasn't a dorm. But I thought that was a really important exercise for not only dorms, but for distribution people to understand how you should price a hotel and what segments you should use and when you should put them in. And so Ideas has this really fun game to do that. From a distribution perspective, we were just talking about, the cost per channel. So, and I would say it's been, I don't know, 10 years plus that Calibri Labs kind of came out and they really put attention to the cost per channel. But I take it a step further because we work with 50-ish third-party partners at MGM, and I break it down to cost per partner. So we analyze everything from the labor involved to on my team, to building the promotions, to the content team's costs, and the technology involved for the content team versus the connectivity team. So we actually break it down because some of these smaller partners actually are harder to work with than some of the larger partners and can cost you more than you expect. So I think cost per partner is a super important exercise to understand.
Okay, excellent. Rhett, what about you?
I talked about it a little bit earlier, but I think there's this myth that, and that's why that's why we have distribution in our titles, is that there's this myth that I put a rate out there and it just goes out there and somehow is miraculously sold. But actually understanding how that connectivity works. What is a switch? Like
Mm-hmm.
defining, understanding these terms that a lot of people don't know, but what is a switch? What is disco? Which, by the way, is not a nightclub. So these types of things that understands what all these different connectivity layers are and how these rates are actually distributed is really important because that's how that ends up getting out to where it needs to go. And that can help outline a strategy. And there are all costs behind all of those as well. And so understanding that it's just not putting out a rate, but getting that rate to the end consumer and what are the functions that are needed to do that.
And could that dovetail into, like, we think about a concept and then we think about like a student-centered assignment that they should do. How is that translatable to an assignment? Like, I can see Sarah's distribution cost per channel, and you can definitely, design an assignment that will have students think through all those components and be aware of them. Rhett, what are your thoughts in terms of doing to understand?
I actually think this would be a really cool exercise for a student, and that is they should reach out to an OTA, right?
Mm-hmm.
And actually understand from the OTA how they're working with the different types of hotels. How do they work with somebody from MGM? How do they work with somebody from Accor? How do they work with this independent property? And actually understand the different ways that there can be connectivity, and then even understanding from them what the costs are. They could give general costs, but what the
Sure.
costs are and what the pros and cons are of each of those connectivity models. I think that would be they could work just with an OTA on that. It would
Yeah.
be really an interesting exercise to even maybe work with two OTAs and see the different perspective between the two OTAs as to how that they perceive connectivity.
Yeah, I like that. And Sarah, I think your point is very well made. You weren't a dorm, but you sat in on the exercise. I love that idea, simulation, by the way. But you sat in on the exercise to understand it. And I think that's an important key for all of our students as well, is to make sure that they have these fundamental understandings, whether they want to go into sales or marketing or revenue or even as a GM, that you understand how all these things work together. Perfect. Anya, any questions we want to field?
Yeah, so one I think
Okay.
ties right into th this conversation. It just says, given the complexity of the distribution landscape and differences across the industry that you described today, what do you think is important for students to know about distribution specifically? So how can we better prepare students for the reality of the industry? I think um, some of this is, I think, really well covered in the suggestion that Vet just made, and kind of perhaps just creating a very simple or using a very simple chart of putting together all these different pieces of distribution in a chart and kind of just walking through these different areas is perhaps something that's a good starting point. Do you have any other thoughts on this, Sarah or Rhett?
Yeah, I actually have Breffney and Kristen, I created a simple distribution diagram, generic, not to MGM, that I can share that you guys can give to everybody just so they understand all the pieces. I don't mean to put this question back on the faculty, but I've often wondered, what are you teaching? I would love to understand that. And by the way, anybody can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to help in whatever way I can. I'm super passionate about this. But I think it's two sides. I always think of it as two sides, right? There's the commercial contractual side of third party and all the complexities that make up a commercial agreement with a third party. And then there's that super complex connectivity side. And so even just understanding the basics of connectivity and the channels and how you connect to them is super important.
Yeah, I think that's a good question to ask, and I would love to know in general across universities how we're all tackling this.
Yeah.
By the way, thank you for offering to share that diagram. I know for myself, obviously, I lead the revenue optimization program here. And, I think one of the fundamental goals when you're teaching any of these streams is to raise that understanding of the other streams. So, we will look at sales and marketing considerations, particularly when it comes to obviously sales for group business. But then on the distribution side, I think to me, and I'm so glad to hear about the concepts that you both kind of honed in on. I teach connectivity and, what are the switches and how do we get there and how does the cost increase the more, it's like you said earlier, Sarah, direct connectivity. You're going to save yourself a lot of money. So I try to have students understand the connectivity path. I do love the suggestion, Rhett, of the OTA conversation. I think it brings some of that to life. I think that's where the connection is there, that you actually bring it to life in a good exercise. And then the other thing that I do is I do distribution channel costs. So I have a project where I have, all the sources where revenue comes from, cost per channel, what paths they go through, and then students have to work out the costs in total.
And Brittany, I would say as well that one thing that we haven't really talked about in all of this is the richness of that connection, which I know that both Sarah and Anya will completely agree with me. A connection itself has varied degrees of success. That's a whole other conversation that could last an hour, and that is a big part of the distribution strategy of an organization, is with whom do we want to connect and how do we do it to get the best return in that content.
Yeah, very well put. Well, on that note, I would like to thank Sarah and Rhett for sharing their expertise and time with us today. We really appreciate it. Anya, thanks for being my fantastic co-host and keeping us on track. And thank you to all of you who joined today. We hope that some of the conversation we had today brings some new perspective or perhaps confirmation that you're doing the right things in the classroom. As Kristen said, we will have webinars that will happen several times a year. So please stay tuned for details about our next webinar, which will take place before the end of this spring semester. So thank you everybody for joining us today.